Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 122. And this is probably the most important piece of AutoCAD for you to learn and get really comfortable with. And I think all too often you take an AutoCAD class and they focus so much on the drawing and learning how to draw, and they never really talk about what Paperspace is or why it's valuable. And as somebody who's actually done real drawings, this is kind of the bread and butter of AutoCAD. This is what AutoCAD is built around, and learning and becoming very comfortable with Paperspace is absolutely critical going forward for you guys, because this is how you do your layouts. This is how you do your scaling. You should never do scaling when you print. That's not the place to do scaling. Scaling needs to be done ahead of that. And so I'm going to walk through today kind of key concepts in AutoCAD, and it's called Modelspace and Paperspace. And Modelspace essentially is what we've been working in. It's the space with the black background. It's where you draw everything full size. So you're drawing a floor plan and you have a room and it's 12 feet, you draw it at 12 feet. Paperspace, on the other hand, is like a sheet of paper. And it's now, how does your drawing fit on that piece of paper? And so we're going to access Paperspace in our AutoCAD by clicking on these tabs that come down here at the bottom of the page. So you see that there's a tab called Model. At least I hope you see there's a tab called Model on your screen. And I apologize, this is like behind me, so it's almost impossible for you guys to see on the projector. But lower left corner it says Model. Then you probably have a couple default tabs called Layout 1, Layout 2, etc. I've already used Layout 1 and Layout 2, so we can see. Let me switch to Layout 2 here, for example. There's Layout 1. And you can see that I was able to arrange all of my drawings on the page rather easily. They're all at scale. This is what we're going to be working on today. So this white piece of paper is essentially, how does this stuff show up in a piece of paper that you can print out? And so as part of your assignment 105, you're going to need to actually print something out. You won't be printing directly from AutoCAD. You're going to make a PDF from AutoCAD, and then we're going to talk about working with Illustrator and doing a little bit of collaging with Illustrator over the top of it. So today is kind of the setup for moving into Illustrator as part of what we're going through in the workflow. So like I said, you probably have Layout 1, Layout 2. You can use any of the layouts. You can actually rename these to be something specific if you want them to be, instead of Layout 1, Layout 2, Layout 3. For my purposes, there's no reason to go through the hoops of renaming them. We'll just stick with Layout 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to work on Layout 3 as my tab because I've already used Layout 1 and Layout 2. You guys can use Layout 1 or Layout 2, or you can create a new one if you want. And essentially, when we have a basic Paperspace setup here, Layout 3 is my default. I see a piece of paper, a white piece of paper. There's a dotted line that goes around the outside, and that's kind of the safe zone for most printers. It's not absolute. It's not perfect. It doesn't mean that if you put a line outside of that dotted line, it won't print. It does print on some printers. Furthermore, sometimes you put everything inside the dotted line and you go to print it, and it still doesn't print everything. So it's not perfect. It depends on the plotter itself and what the margins are for the plotter. Anyway, we're going to make a few modifications to this white piece of paper before we even get into laying things out. And to do that, we're going to right-click down here on Layout 3, or the name. In your case, it might be Layout 1 or Layout 2. And we're going to come up here, and we're going to choose Page Setup Manager from the little pop-up menu here. And that brings up the Page Setup Manager dialog box. And you will see a current page setup for however many layouts you have. I'm obviously working on Layout 3, so that's the one I'm going to work with. I'm going to click on this Modify button here. And when I click on the Modify button, I get a printer dialog. So it's kind of a weird, counterintuitive way of going about this. But this should look like the printer dialog that you've already worked with before. But this is where we're going to set up the piece of paper to print. And so I'm going to go ahead and change the name of my printer or plotter to be DWG to PDF.PC3. It's toward the bottom of the list, just above where we've been picking the publish to web JPEG. It's going to be DWG to PDF. This has a distinct advantage over some of the other PDFs that are available. This will create live lines that we can work with in Illustrator. So it's essentially a very workable format. So we want to make sure that we pick that, DWG to PDF. Then we're going to move down here, and we're going to look at paper size next. And so paper size here, we don't want an 8.5 by 11 sheet. We actually want something called an ArcD, which is 24 by 36. I'm going to pick the ArcD 36 by 24 because it's going to give me the width first and then the height. If I did the opposite, if I did 24 by 36, it would be in portrait mode, and I'd prefer to have it in landscape mode as my layout. So I'm going to pick the 36 by 24 ArcD, and you see the piece of paper changes its size here. Down here under plot area, what to plot, we're going to plot the layout. So previously we've picked a window or whatever. This time it's just going to be layout. Furthermore, over here at plot scale, we want to make sure the scale is set at 1:1 because this is a 24 by 36 sheet of paper. When it prints out, we want it to be 24 by 36. So we're not doing any scaling here. On the right side, we're going to, under plot, style, table, or pen assignments, we're going to pick the first one, which is AutoCAD ACAD.CTB. This just has to do with how thick the lines turn out and whatever. It's good default setup here. If you were working in a firm and they had a very specific way of doing their line weights, you may be loading their own plot style or pen style table, in which case they'll give it to you to load. But we're going to use the default AutoCAD CTB that's right there. As we come down here under quality, you can bump it up to maximum if you want. You can bump it up to presentation. If you leave it on normal, you're not going to see anything dramatically different. You're not doing huge high color, high resolution things anyway, so that's fine. Down here under our plot options, we do want to plot the line weights, so that should be checked. Do we want to plot transparency or not? You can choose to turn it on or turn it off. I'm going to leave it off for right now. Plot with plot styles, yes, that's on. Plot Paperspace last. This has to do with, did you do anything in Paperspace on top of your drawing? So did you put some text in or whatever and you want to make sure it's always on top? You can do that. For our purposes and what we're doing, it's not critical that you have that as well. Our drawing orientation should be landscape, and I've gone through my options, so I'll go ahead and say OK at that point. You'll see then that the page changes in size a little bit. It got a little bit bigger for me. It gives me more space to work with. So I'll go ahead and click on Close in the Page Setup Manager. And now I have essentially a giant piece of paper that I can work with. This is the piece of paper that I'm going to plot ultimately. So what AutoCAD allows us to do is it allows us to create what are called viewports. And these viewports are views of our drawing, so views of our model space. And with these views of our model space, we can set a specific scale. So we could choose, oh, I want this view to be at 1/4 inch equals a foot. I want this view to be at 1/8 inch equals a foot. We can also choose to reorient drawings, i.e. rotate drawings. We can also choose where those show up on this particular page. So by default, you see that I have a viewport that it gave me. If I were to double click inside this viewport, I can then zoom in on, say, my floor plan, for example. And I can make that floor plan show up inside my viewport. I'll double click to get out of it, and there it is. So I can kind of see my floor plan. I could make this viewport a little bit bigger, and then I could double click to get inside it, and I could zoom in a little bit more, and I could make my floor plan a little bit bigger, which is nice. Now the problem here, I'm just moving this up higher on the page. The problem here is that I still don't know what scale this viewport is. And obviously when we print drawings, we want them to be at a particular scale. So I'm going to change this scale by using something called the Properties window. So if it's not already visible for you, if you type Properties, it will show up. When I start doing layout work, I generally leave the Properties window docked at one side because I'm going to be using it a lot. Sometimes it floats in a auto-collapsing little ribbon here. If you want it to be docked, you can take the whole thing, from the side here, and drag it right over to the edge, and it will dock it in and keep it there. And so again, for layout work, I tend to leave this up. If you're doing model space work, close it because you're not doing too much with it. But for layout work, it's important. So if I were to select this viewport right here, and I came down here under the miscellaneous section and we came down here to standard scale, you see it says custom right now. That's because I just zoomed in to a random amount. If instead of having it set for custom, I went and clicked on custom, you'll see that I get a whole range of actual scales available to me. So for example, if I wanted my floor plan to be at 1/4 inch equals a foot, which is what I'm going to suggest that you do for this, if I want it to be at 1/4 inch equals a foot, I can click on 1/4 inch equals a foot, and this drawing now is 1/4 inch equals a foot in scale. For most of you, 1/4 inch equals a foot is perfect. You'll be able to fit all of your elevations and drawings on one page. If you don't, if you have a second floor and you're struggling to fit everything, you might need to go down to 1/8 inch equals a foot. It's up to you what scale is appropriate. So I'm going to give myself a little bit more space here. We'll move over a little bit. And let me move this to be in position. Now, I'm going to tell you guys that there's one thing that you can get stuck with. And that is that if I don't select my object after I get the scale set, and I don't come over here to display locked and switch it to yes, you will find that you will accidentally or intentionally double click inside your viewport, and you'll zoom in and zoom out. And suddenly your scale isn't right anymore. Okay? So we have to go back, select our viewport, and we have to go back to our standard scale, 1/4 inch equals a foot. Now we're back. You don't want to have that happen, so take your viewport and then go ahead and change display locked to yes. If you do that, when you double click and are inside your viewport and you zoom in, it won't change the scale inside your viewport, which is great. The other thing that can happen if you don't lock your viewport, sorry, let me unlock it again. And this is far worse than the last scenario, and that is that you're working and you're looking at something in your drawing, you accidentally double click. I'm inside the viewport now. Wait, where'd my Paperspace go? Right? You can get locked inside a viewport. So just get in the habit, in which case undoing is the best strategy there. Get in the habit of just taking your viewport and locking it. Essentially, your viewport should always be locked unless you're doing something specific where you need it unlocked. Most of the time, it should just stay locked. So leave it locked. So I'll leave that first viewport there, and I'm going to create a second viewport. If I move over to the View tab, and sorry, I have to double check where. Sorry, let me move to the layout, the view. Sorry, it's the Layout tab. My mistake. In the Layout tab over here, you want to stay away from the new layout, but next to that we have Layout Viewports. I want a new rectangular viewport, so I'm going to click on the rectangular viewport, and I'm just going to draw another viewport. And you see that now I have a second view into my drawing. So in this case, I want to show my building's elevation. So let me zoom in on the elevation here. And I apologize, I'm using my old drawing, not the one with the pitched roof, because the pitched roof doesn't have all 4 views, so it's more useful for you guys to see this one. So once again, I need this viewport to be set at 1/4 inch equals a foot. So I'll come over here with it selected, and I'll choose to have my standard scale at 1/4 inch equals a foot, just like my last one. Then I'll go ahead and change display to be locked. So yes, it's locked. And now I want to work with this viewport a little bit. So first off, it would be helpful if this lined up directly with my view here. So I might do a ray, for example. It went straight down. Turn on ortho here for a second. Just to help me line this up. Let me move this over so that that edge lines up. And then I can get rid of that little ray. You see that these two pieces now start to line up. It's always helpful if you can line up views to the best of your ability. Okay? Certainly, if you have a floor plan and you have a view below it, having those two line up is a nice way of doing it. Now, there's some problems in this viewport. Notice that my contour lines run through the viewport. Obviously, I don't want them to be here. But if I were to go in to this viewport, for example, and delete the contour line, it deletes from this viewport too. So that's a problem. So I don't want to just delete it. What I want to do instead is I want to double click to be inside this viewport. I'm going to go back to my layer properties. And as we look at the layer properties, topography is what I'm working on. If I scroll over here, sometimes you have to scroll a little while. I have to find where it is. Yes, there's an item for VP freeze. Do I want to freeze this layer in this viewport only? So yes, I want to freeze the topography layer just in my elevation viewport. So I'm essentially able to turn off the topography in this view, but not turn it off in this view up here. I'll repeat this again. But the idea is that I can choose to turn on or off certain layers based on the viewport, because it's a separate viewport. So let me shrink this down. I don't need the viewport to be quite as big here. Shrink this one down a little bit too. There we go. So now I have this view. I'd like to do my other views as well. So let me come back to my Layout tab. I'm going to click for a new rectangular viewport and put it over here. I'll double click to get inside my view. And I'll start with this view, which would be my, my east elevation. So I can get my viewport set up here. I'll double click to get outside of it. I need to set the scale. So I'll come over here to my standard scale. 1/4 inch equals a foot. There it is. Looks like maybe I need a little bit bigger viewport there. All right, that's pretty good. Now there's a problem here, and that is that this is on its side. I don't want it on its side anymore. So I'll just take the viewport. This used to be far more complicated than it is now. I'll type rotate. I'll set my base point right there. And I will rotate it over to be on its side. So in Paperspace, my elevation is still on its side. But in Modelspace, my elevation is set up correctly. So this is the advantage here, is I can temporarily change all of these things in Modelspace to make the layout work. Yeah? Yes. So whatever you do, whatever you change in Modelspace will show up on these views. Okay? So let me take this and let me move it up here. And I'll move it over to fit. Looks like I need a little bit more space between these, so let me move this over a bit and shorten those topo lines. OK, that looks pretty good. Now here, I have those topo lines again running through this drawing. So I'll double click to get inside of it. I'll come up to my layer properties. I'll go to the topography layer. I'll come across until I get to VP freeze, and I'll freeze the topo in just that view. So now I have this elevation. So I have my south elevation. I have my east elevation. I need my other two elevations. So we'll come back and repeat the process. I'll go to Layout. I want a rectangular viewport. Next viewport here. I'll double click. There's my next view. Let me select it. I'm going to go to my standard scale, change it to 1/4 inch equals a foot. Perfect. I need to then rotate this whole thing. Rotate. I just typed in 180. It was faster than actually doing the rotation. So here it is. Once again, I have to get rid of that topo line. So I'll go back to my layout properties, or my layer properties. I'll go to topography. I'll go over to VP freeze, and I'll freeze it. Once I'm done with these two, I'll go ahead and make sure that this is locked. And I think I forgot to lock the last one. Yep. OK, so those are both locked. I'm going to line these up just a little bit. Even though these views don't line up, sometimes it's nice to just keep consistent lines going down the page. So I'll make that side line up. I need one more view. I'll go back to my Layout tab. I'll go back to my rectangular viewport. There it is. And this will be my west elevation. There's my west elevation. Notice I added an entry, so we have a little bit of a way of getting in. I need to rotate this viewport. There it is. Let me adjust this just a bit. All right, I still need to change the scale, so I'll double click to get inside. Oh, sorry. Select the viewport, and then I'll change the standard scale to 1/4 inch equals a foot. A few modifications to make sure I show the whole building. Maybe a little bit more. There we go. Let me move this. Like that. Let me move it up just a bit more. Maybe in this case, I'll make this one line up with that one. So I'll do a ray from that high roof so that I can make sure that this one lines up on the same plane. There we go. And so I'm essentially starting to lay these pieces out. This one still has that topography line, so I'll double click to get inside it. Go back to my layer properties, topography, and I will turn off or freeze the topography layer in that viewport. Perfect. So now I have all 4 views. They're arranged correctly on the page. It may take a little bit of finesse here to figure out how they fit on the page nicely. Furthermore, maybe the space in between these should be a little bit more consistent. Maybe this one needs to go down just a little bit more, like that, for example. Okay? So I have these views. Now, if I went and did my actual print, if I went and printed this PDF, we would get a result that included the borders on all of these viewports. So we don't need to do batch plotting. We're plotting a single sheet. We don't have to change any of these options because we already set these up in that page setup manager. So I'll just say OK. It'll ask me where I want to save it. I'll save it on the desktop for right now. And let's open that up. So there it is, now that it's printed. Now I have a problem here because I have these boxes around all of my views. We need to make those boxes go away so the views just float there. So we're going to use, remember how I created that non-printing layer for my guides? We're going to use that same layer. We'll take each of the viewports. I'll select them all. And we'll change all of them to be on the no print layer. Like that. When I do that, the borders will all disappear when I go to print. The content will still be there, but the borders will disappear. So let me do plot again. Same options here. We'll go ahead and replace it. Oops. It's open. Sorry, let's close it. Yes, overwrite it. And now we see that I no longer have those borders around my object anymore. That's the goal. So those should be on a non-printing layer. And then your elevation views will all float there. If I were doing a pure AutoCAD drawing, Paperspace is also the place that I'd put text and symbols and dimensions and leaders and all of that sort of thing. We're not going to do that in this class. We will probably put a little bit of text in Illustrator afterward, and I'll show you kind of graphically what you might want to do. But for the most part, we're going to stay away from text and we're going to stay away from dimensions. If you need to put dimensions in a drawing, though, this is the place that you would be doing it. And AutoCAD is really good at doing it, but you'd be doing it in Paperspace, not in Modelspace. Some of you asked earlier why your hidden lines weren't showing up. You switched your line type. So for example, right here, see how I have a dashed line that represents the door because it's behind this wall? In Paperspace, or excuse me, in Modelspace, there's my view. I've assigned all of these lines here the hidden to line weight. So it's available just underneath the thickness, or the line weight, is the line type. I've loaded hidden to. If you wanted a different one, you can click on Other If it's not listed here, you can click on Load, and AutoCAD has a bunch of different lines that you can choose to use. Okay? Hidden to, I think, works really nice. So I pick Hidden to frequently. There it is, hidden 0.5x. It's a little bit finer dash. That's the one I typically load. I then assigned these to the Hidden to layer. But in Modelspace, those dashed lines don't show up. However, when we switch to Paperspace, those dashed lines show up perfectly. And that's obviously the point. So things that don't necessarily show up in Modelspace will definitely show up in Paperspace. You should also be able to see your line weights when you're in Paperspace, assuming your line weights are turned on. If your line weights are not on, you won't see them as well. For some reason, it's a little bit easier to see your line weights when you're in Paperspace because of that white background instead of the opposite. So your goal today in exercise 122 is to create this 24 by 36 layout with all 4 of your elevation views in it. If you haven't done all 4 of your elevation views yet, which I know there's plenty of you that haven't, you have a good 2 hours to keep doing that in addition to doing this layout. I would suggest, while it's fresh in your mind, at least starting the layout process, put your plan in, make sure you can set the scale on your plan, then go back to Modelspace. The best thing about it is that changes that you make in Modelspace automatically populate right into your Paperspace. So it makes it really easy to work with. Okay? So again, Paperspace is for printing. It's what the final layout's going to be. It's where scales are assigned to drawings. And you're going to use Viewports to set up multiple drawings on a single page. Modelspace is where you actually create the model in the first place, where you create the drawing. Make sense? OK, so I'll turn you loose now. And if you have any questions, let me know.